Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for a presentation on integrated pest management for your home and garden and your landscape. I would like just to mention quickly that for questions that you might have during the presentation, please type them in the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, our presenter will address your questions. Our presenter today is Tom Schrader, and I'll speak about him in just a minute. My name is Sherida Phibbs, and I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator for Humboldt and Del Norte counties. As I mentioned, Tom Schrader is our speaker, and Tom is a retired IT professional from American Airlines. He completed his Master Gardener training in 2012 while he was living along the Russian River in Sonoma County. Tom relocated to Eureka in around 2014, and he became also a master food preserver, and he's very active with that as well. He is also an active member of the Humboldt Orchid Society. So growing up on a small farm in Iowa, Tom's family practiced what we call today integrated pest management to maintain a sustainable environment between agricultural and animals. Today, Tom's going to be sharing his experience and his specialized IPM training from UC Davis about a balanced approach to gardening. And with that, Tom, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sherida. Greetings, everyone. Again, I'm Tom Schrader. Welcome to this Master Gardener presentation. I'm here today to discuss gardening practices that are known to result in healthier gardens and a healthier planet. So again, I want to repeat that we are the UCCE Master Gardeners. And first, a word about the Master Gardeners. We are volunteers who have been trained by the University of California through a cooperative extension to provide home gardeners with research-based information about gardening practices that protect the environment and that result in successful gardening experiences. Now, we emphasize a balanced approach, and that's an approach that weighs short-term strategies versus long-term strategies, with sustainability as a major goal. More about this in a minute. The website addresses and other resources that I talk about in this presentation are all listed later in this talk and will be available on our Master Gardener website. This is a screenshot from our University of California IPM online. The University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources have a website that provides all of the research-based information that you need. Now, IPM, what's that stand for? That stands for Integrated Pest Management. So when you arrive at this page, it's IPM, on that home page, most of your home gardening answers can be found when you select that top left-hand box, which says Home Garden, Turf, and Landscape Pests. So when you're looking for answers to your home gardening problems, go there and click on that spot. Okay, let's get started. What makes the gardener happy? Well, the short answer is healthy, productive plants. If it were not for pests, most of us would be happy gardeners. So what's a pest? Well, pests are organisms that damage or interfere with desirable plants. Now, there are many kinds of garden pests. Basically, we're talking about any organism that interferes with the growth and development of our plants. And as you can see from my picture, our pets and children can easily fit into this category. Many conventional and commercial gardening practices and products, now this is conventional and commercial, may be ineffective or they can create adverse effects. Now there are many products marketed to gardeners for managing pests that have never been validated by serious research done by qualified people without a financial interest in their product. They may not be effective, and they may be a total waste of your money. Or worse, they may result in damage to the environment. Many of these products are promoted as necessary for the health of your plants, and many of them are promoted as effective pesticides. Now, let me give you an example. There's a plethora of fertilizer products to promote vigorous growth in my vegetable garden. I could use one of these products and it would indeed accomplish this, and with minimal cost and effort on my part. But this practice often results in leaching of excess fertilizer into the groundwater. A flush of vegetative growth of the fertilized plants that can often be attractive to various pests, insects, as well as microbes. And that can increase the problems that lead to pesticide use and further contamination of groundwater. And they may also harm the beneficial organisms that we rely on for a healthy planet. And this practice would do nothing to replenish organic matter in the soil that is continually depleted from the growing plants and normal organisms that live in healthy soils. So it's not sustainable and it's not very well balanced. So a well-balanced approach to prevention and management of plant pest problems is, now this is a balanced approach, effective and environmentally sound. Now, that's what we're going to talk about today. So I could use 3 to 4 inches of compost in my garden instead of a bag of fertilizer. Now, the compost may cost a bit more than the synthetic fertilizer and may take a little bit more effort, but this is a more effective and environmentally sound and sustainable practice. Now, I'll discuss compost later. The point is short-term effect versus long-term effect. That's balance. 4 fundamental facts. A healthy planet has pests. Now, a healthy garden has pests. Happy gardener or happy plants tolerate low levels of pests. And happy gardeners tolerate low levels of pests. So a balanced approach acknowledges that pests can be a problem, but a balanced and sustainable approach to gardening requires that gardeners embrace these facts. So a good gardener's bumper sticker might read, "Healthy gardens have pests." Well, the first thing that we need to do to have a balanced garden is we have to have the right plant in the right place. So many pest problems can be reduced by preventative practices that promote healthy plants that can tolerate low levels of pests. Now, this is assuming you have selected appropriate plants for your setting. Now, that's key. Plants that are growing in an appropriate setting, and this is an inappropriate setting, will be stressed, and that will be much more vulnerable to pests. Assessment of your garden setting will help in appropriate plant selection. Now, find out what your zone is and figure out how much light exposure you have. Determine the kind of soil you have and how much space is available for the mature plant. So how many times do we see around town where we see huge hydrangeas planted right up next to a house? Well, they probably didn't consider how big that hydrangea was going to be when it got mature. Also, when possible, purchase pest-resistant plant varieties. Well, now, how do I know which plant right place? Well, I listed 4 places where you can find out more about plants and the requirements. Your local nursery can be a valuable resource. Not so good are those big box stores. So find a good local nursery that you can trust and ask all the questions that you have. Now, the master gardeners can be consulted through our website, and we'll talk about the URL for the Master Gardener website later on. Another valuable website for home gardeners is the UC Davis online IPM. Now, we talked about that just a few slides ago. Also, the Sunset Western Garden book is a publication that many master gardeners consult. This is a great book, and I use it all the time. So again, let's talk again about what integrated pest management is. It's a term used to describe the balanced approach that we're advocating here. So in a nutshell, it simply means to combine various strategies that by themselves may not be terribly effective, but when used together have been shown to dramatically increase effectiveness. One of those is prevention. Have good gardening practices, monitoring, periodic inspection. If you're a gardener like me, you're out in that garden every single day, looking over the leaves, looking at how dry the soil is, everything that you can see about the plant. And with those 2 things, then you develop a management strategy. There's physical controls, and that would include things like hand picking bugs or snails, trapping with a sticky tape, or things like a copper strip that you can put around the raised bed that prevents snails and slugs from crawling over into your raised bed. Now, in Sonoma County, I worked with a master gardener who had lots of cucumber beetles in the green beans. What she did was she took an old dustbuster from her husband and took that out every morning and vacuumed up the cucumber beetles. Can you imagine that? Well, it worked. Biological controls, that is what we're going to talk about when we get into predatory insects that eat and compete with the pests. So for example, I could use a stiff spray of water to knock the aphids off my plant, and that would temporarily help quite a bit, or I could plant plants that would attract lady beetles, which are predatory insects. The last thing is chemical controls. Chemical controls are going to be your pesticides, and we're going to talk about those a bit later. So your plant care, you need to know all of these 7 things to give your plant the best care. Growing healthy plants requires care. And that can include a number of gardening activities depending on the plant, its age, and its environment. So planting before conditions are ideal for growth can result in slow growth that leads an immature plant, which is vulnerable to the attention of pests. So we'll go through all of these 7 things and we'll discuss each one of these. The first thing is compost, and that comes under soil preparation. Compost improves the soil structure. So the addition of compost to your soil will meet most plant needs if adequate amounts are used. Most plants will do nicely with 3 to 4 inches annually of compost. and you work that into the top 6 to 8 inches of your soil. And over time, the amount of compost that you have to incorporate can be reduced unless you're growing plants that need a lot of nitrogen. So the compost also increases the water holding capacity. It provides necessary nutrients, promotes biological diversity, gets those good microbes into your soil, and decreases pollution from nutrient leaching and runoff. Mulch, that's a gardener's best friend. So any material placed on the soil to cover and protect it, that's mulch. And examples are wood chips, leaves, and straw. Now, mulch is not the same thing as compost. Mulch is, like you see in the picture, is bark and things like that. So the wood chips, leaves, and straw. Now, how it helps is it reduces the weeds, because weeds, like all of our plants, they need sunlight. And if you cover the weeds or the soon to be germinated weeds with 3 to 4 inches deep of mulch, they're not going to get any sunlight to grow. It also minimizes water usage, helps equalize the temperature of the soil, and will eventually decompose and improve the soil quality as well. Now, more isn't always better, so limit the depth to 5 to 6 inches, especially around the shallow-rooted plants. Okay, let's talk about water management. So inappropriate water management causes so many plant problems. Too little or too much water equals stress and poor performance. So when you see a wilting plant, you may think it's not getting enough water when indeed it may already have too much water. How much water does a plant need? Well, a simple check is to check the soil moisture, and that's to grab a handful of soil in your palm, form it into a ball. If it holds shape and accepts a thumbprint, it's in good shape. If water squishes out, then it's too wet. If it crumbles right away or is too hard, then it's too dry. Drip irrigation is a good way to manage your water management. And it's an ideal method for watering most plants. It allows you to deliver just the right amount of water at the root zone that result in fewer weeds and significant water savings, not to mention your time. So if you're using a drip line and that drip line is not watering the area between your plants, you're not going to get very many weeds. So over time, drip irrigation can be cost effective too, and it can be installed by most anybody. They can be quite simple or very elaborate, and that depends on your garden size. Raised beds and containers. Raised vegetable beds can be a terrific way to avoid many gardening problems. It's much easier to plant and weed. It allows for better soil preparation and adequate drainage. And it will exclude gophers and moles. If you have a number of raised beds or containers, that will help facilitate crop rotation, which is important. Now we're going to talk about that. Let's say that you have a garden spot like this. So you can divide it into 4 areas. One area are vegetables like your chard, your beets, carrots, potatoes, and peas. Another section will have your onions, garlic, broccoli, salad greens. Another one has your tomatoes. Another one has your beans. So you divide your garden spot into these 4 quadrants. So that's the first year. The next year, what you do for this method of crop rotation is you exchange the corners. So you can see in year 2, I switched the beets and the beans, and the garlic with the tomatoes. This helps reduce the plant pathogens and pests that accumulate in the soil that affect specific families of plants. And the idea is to starve those pests out. Now, this works for many pests and pathogens because many of them are species specific, tomatoes being one of those. So we talked about year 1, year 2. What do we do for year 3? Well, now we switch the top and the bottom. And in year 4, we switch back those corners. And then we start all over again. So I hope that the color combination explains this. You can find out more about crop rotation on our Master Gardener website. Now, if you don't have a garden where you grow those 4 different things, this is another way of doing crop rotation. Your beans are in one area, your cucumbers in another area, your tomatoes are in another area. You just rotate them counterclockwise like the diagram here. Okay, does anybody have weeds? Why do we weed? I took a picture of Sherida out there weeding her garden. Oh, sorry, Sherida, just joking, that's not Sherida. Well, weeds outcompete cultivated plants for water, light, and nutrients. It's just the way it is. And they can also harbor plant pests and pathogens. So most of your weeds can be controlled with pulling and mowing. Just get out there. Clearly, if you let them get this bad, you got your work cut out for you. Now, herbicides have a place for eradicating some of the most persistent perennial weeds, such as field bindweed, Bermuda grass, ivy, poison oak. But these should only be used when all other methods are not feasible. And use those herbicides strictly according to the manufacturer's directions. Pruning. Well, some people call me a pruning maniac because I get out there and I prune like a nut. I take care of the fruit trees down at Andy Ryan House, down between F and E Street here in Eureka. So pruning, you want to do that in the dormant season. So when you have deciduous trees like fruit trees, when they're dormant, all the leaves are gone, so you can see exactly what you got. So dormant or pruning, like I say here, it improves the structure of the tree and it increases the plant vigor. We had a place in Texas when I lived out there. There was a new build and we had brand new live oak trees that were planted on the property. And the first year I went out there and started pruning, like I say, like a maniac. And my partner just about had a stroke. He couldn't figure out why I was going out there cutting these brand new trees back. And I said, well, on the days that I'm doing this, you just need to go take a drive somewhere. Well, what we saw over the second year and the third year of doing this, the trees just took off like a rocket. So pruning increases plant vigor because it stimulates the hormones in the tree. Now, again, you can still prune anytime that you see any diseases, damages, or dead branches. Now, make sure that you research your particular tree before you're pruning to make sure that you're doing it in the right shape. And when I talk about a shape, I'm talking about like a central leader type tree or a vase type tree. Disinfecting your tools after you're pruning. Some pathogens can be transferred to healthy plants from tools that you prune with from unhealthy plants. So you can transfer diseases from a sick plant to a healthy plant if you don't disinfect your tools. Well, how should you do it? Well, first of all, wipe off any debris. Avoid bleach. The reason to avoid bleach is that it's very corrosive to metal. And that makes the tool increasingly difficult to disinfect because it'll start getting rusty pits in it. Lysol is better. WD-40 is also good. Sanitation. I hope your garden doesn't look like this picture. Debris in the garden is a home for many pests, not just plant pests. Fall is a good time to rake up that debris and litter in the yard. It helps to reduce the pests and pathogens that can overwinter under protective cover. So while you've got these piles of leaves and garbage out there, all of these pests in the wintertime can be hiding under there. Any litter that you have from plants that show diseases, don't put those in your compost pile. Bag them up and put them in the garbage. Only healthy lawn waste can be used in your compost bin. All right, everybody's wanting to know about insects. Well, insects, there's over 1 million species. And if you count them all, that's 2 billion insects per human on the planet. Wow. You think that's a lot? Only less than 1% of these insects are pests. Mankind spends billions of dollars every year trying to control these pests. We poison our homes. Gardeners sprays and sprinkle all kinds of vile potions, and farmers attack them from the air with tractors. We do a terrible job. $64 million pounds of broad-spectrum insecticides were manufactured and sold for U.S. homes and gardeners in 2012. 64 million pounds. And this is just in the U.S. And it's just for homes and gardens. This is not agriculture. This is not the farms. This is just our homes and gardeners. One particular concern is broad spectrum in pesticides. Because those can persist in the environment and affect non-target organisms. What I'm showing here, these are some of our beneficial insects. These are the good guys, if you want to call them the good guys. Meet the beneficials. These are the natural enemies of garden pests. We want to avoid pesticides that'll kill them. We want to choose plants that provide pollen, nectar, and shelter. And we want to keep the ants out of pest-infested plants. Ants, why do we worry about ants? Well, whenever you see ants crawling up a plant, you have a pretty good idea that you also have aphids. Aphids secrete a sweet jelly or nectar that the ants absolutely love. So these ants will protect the aphids from the beneficial insects. Should I buy beneficials? Well, there's a big debate on that. We generally say you're wasting your money. It's better to attract beneficials with the right kind of plants. And we talk about that again on our IPM website. Are you worried about pests? Well, the first thing you want to do is an assessment. Let's say you think you have a pest problem. But before you do anything, take any action, take a deep breath, do your assessment. How serious is the pest damage? Can my plant tolerate this damage? Remember, healthy plants can tolerate some amount of pest activity. But also, pest identification is essential. Identification is key. We're going to do a little quiz here. Which bug is a beneficial? These two bugs, they look pretty much the same. One of them is a pest, and one of them is a beneficial bug. The rough stink bug is a beneficial insect. You don't want to get rid of those. Okay, let's look at these two. Well, they're both a beetle and they have spots. The good beetle, of course, everybody knows, is the lady beetle. The cucumber beetle is the one that'll go out there and chew up your green bean leaves. So my point here is identification is key. Well, how in the world do I know how to identify all these bugs? Well, here we go again. You see IPM Online. We have a whole page and section about insects, mites, mollusks or snails, and nematodes. Go here, find out how to identify what you got and how to manage them. We'll repeat this URL later on, and it'll be on our website. So don't worry about it if you can't write it down fast enough. So let's talk about if we have to use a pesticide. Don't feel guilty, just be smart about it. Well, what would be a perfect pesticide? It's one that would be effective, right? It would be selective, would only get rid of the bugs that we don't want and not hurt the beneficials. It would be inexpensive. We want to be able to afford it. And it should be easy to use. That would be a perfect pesticide. It would not cause pesticide resistance. So what we mean is that a certain insect over time would become resistant to a pesticide. Or it would leave residue or stay in the soil. That's a tall order. So I'm going to go through and we're going to talk about some less toxic pesticides that you can use in the garden. Insecticidal soaps, those are the ones for soft body insects, like your aphids, whiteflies, mealybugs. The active ingredient is potassium salts of fatty acids, 2%. They're produced by adding potassium hydroxide to either animal fats or plant oils. How they work, they are effective against a wide range of insects, like I talked here. Aphids, whiteflies, soft scales, mealybugs, grasshoppers, thrips, and mites. How they work is they damage the protective outer covering, which is a cuticle, and the cell membranes that protect the insect from dehydrating. Now, they do require direct contact and good coverage, and you may have to do it more than once. Let's look at the score on here. So like we said, they're effective because they, if used where they're needed, they dry out, they destroy the cuticle and the insect dries out. Selective, oh, there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down because some of our beneficial insects could be damaged by them, especially bees. Resistance, good for resistance. good for not being persistent, they're inexpensive, and they're easy to use. They don't leave any residue, and they're not likely to affect the mature beneficials, just the immature ones, the ones that are still growing. That's your insecticidal soaps. Next, horticultural oils. That's like your neem oil. They work on aphids, whiteflies, mealybugs, scales, lace bugs, psyllids, and thrips. And their active ingredient is hydrophobic extractive neem oil, 70%. Okay? How they work? Well, this oil works by suffocating the insects because it plugs up their breathing holes. How's the score on them? Well, again, they're effective and not effective because you've got to do them, you got to do it more than once probably. Selective, pretty good on the selective, although watch out for bees. Don't spray anything while bees are out there foraging. Resistance is good. They're non-persistent, inexpensive. Neem oil is cheap. And it's easy to use. Well, yes and no, because you've got to do it more than one time. Good coverage is required. Iron phosphates. This is for our friends, the snails and the slugs. Active ingredient is iron phosphate, 1%. Iron phosphate is formulated with an attractant for the snails. And once they eat it, they quit eating. So it takes a couple of days where they crawl back to where their hiding places are and they actually die. And that's why you see a lot of empty snails sometimes. That's how it works. What's the scorecard on it? Yes, it's effective. Selective, and why I say selective is a thumbs up, thumbs down, is there are some areas where we've released the decollete snail, which is a beneficial snail. So it would kill those too. So it's yes and no because of that particular snail. Resistance, good. Persistence, yes and no. Inexpensive, cheap, easy, cheap, good. Now we have one that I hope everybody can pronounce, and that's Azadirachtin. It's a botanical insecticide that was derived from the neem tree, and it works as a growth inhibitor. So any plant-eating insect that ingests it from eating the leaves will have direct contact with it. Now, these are your caterpillars and your thrips. This is kind of a yes and no. One is being effective, selective, persistent, because you're going to have some immature beneficial bugs sometimes on the leaves. These will get affected. And it can also harm the bees if they get sprayed on. And we also know that it can kill fish if the concentrations are large enough and it reaches the waterways. So that's something to be aware of if you have to resort to Azadirachtin. Spinosad. Many of you probably heard about Spinosad. It's a microbial. It's a relatively new pesticide, which was derived from a rare bacteria that was discovered on a Caribbean island by a vacationing scientist. It gets your caterpillar, straps, and beetles, and it's Spinosad. Effective, selective, yes and no. It's really pretty good, but just don't use it around the bees when the bees are foraging. One other thing I might mention for people that have dogs, Spinosad, this particular pesticide, is the active ingredient in Comfortis and Trifexis, which is an oral medication that is sold by prescription for dog owners to give their dogs orally for flea prevention. So do a little research on that. I'm not sure if everybody wants to be giving their pets Spinosad internally. Here's another tongue twister, but we're just going to call it BT. And it's a microbial that occurs in bacteria. And what it does is when the caterpillars eat it, they starve to death. So it's selected for caterpillars. So if you have caterpillars, this is a good one to use. We give it a 2 thumbs up because it will get rid of those caterpillars. It's also very safe. One of the trials that was performed by Cornell University involved 18 people, 18 volunteers who ingested 1 gram or inhaled 100 milligrams of BT for 5 days and without any adverse health effects. Pyrethrins. These things work on all insects. It is a natural occurring pesticide that was made from the extract of the chrysanthemum flower. Now, it's not effective. We got a thumbs down. It's not effective to kill insects by itself. It just knocks them down and they can recover. So sometimes you'll see these combined with something else. And it's not all that selective because it works on all insects. So don't confuse it with pyrethroids, not thrins, but throids, which are a synthetic pesticide. And these are not non-toxic. Read your label carefully. So let's talk about labels. When you're looking at the store, you're down at Ace Hardware and you're looking at insecticides. They have a whole aisle of them, or 2. Look at this label. Look for the active ingredient. In this one, it is Spinosad. Look at the directions, look at the signal words, look about how to store and dispose of it. Signal words. These are going to be on all pesticides. If you see a caution, that means slightly toxic when eaten, absorbed, or inhaled. It can cause slight eye or skin irritation. Warning is a step up. It's moderately toxic. Danger is highly toxic by at least one of these exposures, eaten, absorbed, or inhaled. And it may be corrosive with irresistible damage to, say, for example, your eyes. So really be careful. Look at these signal words. If something is highly, 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 highly toxic, there'll be a red poison on the label. Sometimes you'll see these OMRI things on the pesticides. Well, OMRI is organic. It stands for Organic Materials Review Institute. They're in Eugene, Oregon. And to get this certification, they must be natural and not synthetic. So if you care about organic and you care about these things, you see OMRI, you've got a good thing there for you. One other thing is dormant spray on the trees and shrubs. In the wintertime, use your dormant spray. I use a copper spray for my fruit trees. I spray them about 3 times in the winter. And what that will do is it's also a fungicide, but it's also can get rid of those insect eggs that are going to make it through the winter. Okay, wow, a lot of slides. What did we learn today? We learned all this stuff. Choose your plants with care. Care for your plants. Use that compost and mulch. Consider installing a drip irrigation. Most of all, learn to live with a low level of pests. And if you have to, use less toxic pesticides. You can always consult with a master gardener if you have questions. Here's our web page. Here is the page, our help desk. Ask a Master Gardener. Complete a help desk ticket, you see that towards the bottom, and submit it, and we will get right back to you. Now, I talked a lot about resources. Here's a list of the resources that I talked about today. And these will also be available on our website. You can find all of your answers to your pest management questions here. Wow. Now, question and answer time. We got just a few minutes. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. That was such great information. And one other thing that I'd like to add is, as Master Gardeners, the IPM website is our go-to for our very first when we start researching any problems or questions that we might have. So it's a extremely valuable tool, and we always encourage everybody to use it. It's just full of information, and you just can't get enough good information as you can from the IPM website. So yes, we have some questions. The first one I have here for you, Tom, is can you use rubbing alcohol to disinfect tools?
Yes, you can. That's a quick answer.
Okay, next question. Do you have any tips for explaining pest management to children, since it seems there might be a lot of emotions behind life cycles of pests and plants?
Well, I think the best thing to learn is not just one solution is going to fix all the problems, and it's not going to be balanced. So like what I tried to emphasize here, when you first start out, figure out the right plant for the right place. That's the first thing that you want to do. Check your soil. And if you got kids, boy, if I had kids around the house, I would have them out there weeding like little soldiers and let them know that weeding is a good thing. And what else can I say? You know, we had down in Sonoma County, we had a garden that was next to the Humane Society in Sebastopol. And we had a group of foster children that came out once a week and spent the afternoon at the garden. And these kids were wonderful. We took them into the garden. We were master gardeners. We took them into the garden, taught them everything to know about plants and care and the benefits of plants. In fact, these kids would pull up carrots out of the ground and eat them. They were just so happy about seeing things grow and things that they could use to eat. And flowers, you know, beautiful things. So it's a great thing to get kids introduced to.
Absolutely. Let's see. Our next question. Are there any negative issues to using these insecticidal products in overlapping or same time, same place applications?
Well, I would want you to, first of all, identify what your pest problem is. Try to find the damage. Look for an insect if you can find it. And then either take a picture of it, submit it to our help desk, and we'll help you identify it. Or you can go on the UC IPM site, try to identify it. Once you've identified the pest, then pick out your pesticide. You may not have to use more than one particular kind of pesticide. For myself, at home in my greenhouse where I have my pesticides, I really only have one, and that's neem oil. I really don't have anything else in my greenhouse that I go out and use. because neem oil also can take care of things like fungus and mold. I love it.
Next question. Are the zones changing with the climate change, or should I say significantly changing?
Well, I haven't heard anything about it. There are two different kinds of climate zones. There's one that the US government puts out, and then there's one that Sunset puts out. The one that I like to go to more often is the Sunset zones, because they're more finite and they break up the larger zones into more microclimates. But as far as climate change, who knows what's going to happen, but I haven't heard anything about it yet.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that yet. And if you want to know your climate zones, we do have that on our website, and the map area of Humboldt and Del Norte counties. And you'll be able to identify your sunset zone map. Unlike the USDA, where they have an interactive website where you put in your zip code, it then comes up with your USDA zone, the cold hardiness zone. And the sunset zone, as Tom mentioned, it not only takes into account your cold zones, but it takes into account about 5 or 6 other criteria, one being the heat, humidity, and the prevailing winds, etc. So I too rely on the sunset zone, and again, you can find that on our website. And when I send out the follow-up email, I will provide you with the link that will link you right into that area on the website, so you can look into your sunset zones. Tom, so what about 2 or more pests at the same time? How do you handle that?
Well, if they're similar things, like if they're the soft-bodied or they're the ones that have the breathing holes, you can use one particular one to get many different insects. So again, it's your identification. I would not be afraid to use a horticultural oil and a insecticidal soap. So you may try using one to start out with. If that's not doing a job for you, then you may want to switch to a different one, because both of those, the horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps, cover a lot of ground, and they're not as specific as, say, like BT, which is caterpillars.
Right. Well, does anybody else have any other questions? That's all I see for here. I've got a lot of great thank yous, and people, Tom, have really enjoyed your presentation, and they've learned a lot for this complex subject. It is very complex, and Tom did a great job just trying to bring a huge subject into a short amount of period, and he did a great job explaining the complexity of this. But as he mentioned, a lot of this you can, just by your cultural care, you can eliminate or reduce the amount of pests in your garden. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'd like to thank Tom for this excellent presentation. We do have 2 more presentations coming up next week. I'll be speaking on success with houseplants, so be sure to join us for that. And then our final presentation is going to be with Yana, and that is reducing building risks for wildfire. And Yana is our county director, so that is going to be a very well worth presentation to watch. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom. We had a great time today. Thank you.